Today, I'm going to tell you the story of a rancher who discovered an Apache child hiding under his wagon, clutching a flint knife. Samuel Morrison and his wife Martha, still grieving their own daughter's death, faced a life-changing decision when they found young Aiyana alone and wounded. But the outcome exceeded all expectations. Please subscribe to our channel and comment where you're listening to this story from. The discovery under the wagon. The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty trading post as Samuel Morrison guided his loaded wagon toward the wooden hitching posts. It was late September 1885, and the heat still clung to the desert like a stubborn memory of summer. Sam wiped the sweat from his weathered brow with the back of his sleeve, squinting against the glare that bounced off the adobe buildings of Tucson's outskirts. "Easy there, Belle," he murmured to his mare as she snorted and stamped, eager for water and shade after the long journey from his ranch. Sam had come to town for supplies, salt, coffee, ammunition, and medicine for his ailing wife, Martha. The Apache raids had been increasing lately, making these trips more dangerous, but necessity drove him forward. His ranch sat 20 miles northeast, isolated but peaceful, where he and Martha had built their life over the past 15 years. As he climbed down from the wagon seat, his boots hitting the packed earth with a dull thud, Sam noticed something odd. Belle kept looking back toward the rear of the wagon, her ears twitching nervously. The horse had always been skittish around strangers, but this seemed different, more alert than afraid. "What's got into you, girl?" Sam asked, patting her neck as he moved to unhitch her. That's when he heard it, a barely audible scraping sound, like metal against wood, coming from beneath his wagon. Sam froze, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt revolver at his hip. In these parts, any unexpected sound could mean trouble. Bandits, rattlesnakes, or worse, Apache warriors seeking revenge for the recent military campaigns against their people. Moving cautiously, Sam crouched down and peered under the wagon. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. Huddled in the narrow space between the rear axle and the wagon bed was a small figure, a child, no more than 7 or 8 years old, clutching something metallic that glinted in the filtered sunlight. The child's dark hair was matted with dust and sweat, and the traditional Apache clothing, a simple tunic and moccasins, was torn and stained with what looked like dried blood. But it was the eyes that struck Sam most forcefully, large, dark, and filled with a mixture of terror and fierce determination that seemed far too mature for such a young face. In the child's small, trembling hand was a flint knife, its sharp edge catching the light as it was raised defensively. The blade was primitive but deadly, knapped with the skill that spoke of Apache craftsmanship. "Easy there, little one," Sam said softly, keeping his voice as gentle as possible while remaining crouched at a safe distance. "I'm not going to hurt you." The child, Sam couldn't tell if it was a boy or girl, pressed back further against the wagon's undercarriage, the knife held steady despite the obvious exhaustion that seemed to weigh down every movement. Sam's mind raced. How long had this child been hiding under his wagon? The journey from his ranch had taken 4 hours, but he'd stopped twice along the way, once at Miller's Creek to water Belle, and again to check a loose wheel. The child could have climbed aboard at any point during those stops. "Are you hurt?" Sam asked, switching to the few Apache words he'd learned from friendly traders over the years. His pronunciation was clumsy, but the child's eyes widened with surprise at hearing their native tongue. The response came in rapid Apache, too fast for Sam to understand, but the tone was clear, desperate, pleading, yet defiant. The child was asking for something, or perhaps explaining something crucial. "I don't understand all of what you're saying," Sam admitted, "but I can see you're scared and probably hungry. When's the last time you ate?" At the mention of food, the child's resolve seemed to waver slightly. The knife lowered an inch, though it remained ready to strike. Sam slowly reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a piece of jerky he'd been saving for the ride home. He placed it on the ground halfway between himself and the wagon, then backed away. "It's yours if you want it. I'm going to stand up now, but I'm not going anywhere." Rising carefully, Sam kept his hands visible and moved with deliberate slowness. The child watched every movement, clearly ready to bolt or fight at the first sign of aggression. As Sam stood there in the blazing afternoon heat, he couldn't help but wonder about this child's story. Where were the parents? What had happened to separate such a young one from their tribe? The blood on the clothing suggested violence, and given the recent tensions between settlers and Apache bands, Sam feared the worst. The trading post owner, Joe Martinez, emerged from his store and noticed Sam standing motionless beside his wagon. "Everything all right, Sam?" Joe called out, approaching with the casual gait of a man accustomed to the desert heat. "Keep your distance, Joe," Sam said quietly, not taking his eyes off the space under the wagon. "We've got a situation here." Joe stopped immediately, his hand moving instinctively to his own weapon. Trouble? A child, Apache, armed and scared. Joe's expression grew serious. "Alone. Appears so. Been hiding under my wagon, probably for hours." "Could be a trap," Joe warned, scanning the surrounding area for signs of other Apache. "Sometimes they use children as bait." Sam had considered this possibility, but something about the child's behavior suggested genuine desperation rather than calculated deception. The fear in those dark eyes was too real, too raw to be an act. "I don't think so," Sam said. "This one's running from something, not leading us into it." And the jerky remained untouched on the ground, but Sam noticed the child's gaze kept drifting to it. Hunger was clearly overriding caution, but pride and fear still held the upper hand. "What are you planning to do?" Joe asked, wiping his own perspiration with a bandana. Sam didn't answer immediately. He knew what the right thing to do was, according to most settlers: report the child to the authorities, who would likely send the young one to a reservation or worse. But looking at this small, defiant figure clutching a knife like a lifeline, Sam felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't experienced since he and Martha had lost their own child to fever 3 years ago. "Child," Sam said, crouching down again and switching back to English, speaking slowly and clearly. "I'm going to get you some water and real food. You can keep that knife if it makes you feel safer, but I promise you, on my honor, that I won't let anyone hurt you." Adirden, the words seemed to have an effect. The child's grip on the knife loosened slightly, and for the first time, Sam caught a glimpse of hope flickering in those ancient young eyes. Building trust and broken barriers. 20 minutes passed in the desert heat before the child finally reached for the jerky. Sam watched from his position near the trading post's wooden porch, maintaining enough distance to avoid seeming threatening while staying close enough to protect the young one if needed. The small hand darted out like a snake strike, snatched the dried meat, and disappeared back under the wagon. Sam heard the desperate sounds of eating, too fast, too hungry, the kind of eating that spoke of days without food. "Joe, bring me some water and bread," Sam called softly to the trading post owner who had been watching from the doorway. "And maybe some of that dried fruit your wife keeps." "You sure about this, Sam?" Joe asked as he gathered the requested items. "Word is there's been Apache raiding parties in the area. Could be the kid's family is planning something." Sam shook his head. "Look at that child, Joe. Does that look like someone whose family is nearby? Those clothes are torn, there's dried blood, and I'd bet my ranch this little one hasn't seen another soul in days." Joe approached carefully, carrying a canvas bag with food and a canteen of fresh water. "Here, but Sam, what are you planning to do? You can't just keep an Apache child." "Why not?" The words came out before Sam had fully thought them through, but once spoken they felt right. "Martha and we've got room, and after losing our Sarah," Joe's expression softened. Everyone in the territory knew about Sam and Martha's daughter, taken by scarlet fever when she was just 6 years old. The loss had nearly destroyed Martha, and Sam had watched his wife retreat into a shell of grief that 3 years hadn't been able to crack. "That's different, Sam. Sarah was your blood. This is an Apache child. The law, the neighbors, the territorial government. The law can go to hell," Sam said quietly, his voice carrying a steel that surprised even himself. "I'm talking about a child who needs help." He approached the wagon again, this time carrying the bag of food and water canteen. "Little one, I've got more food and water. I'm going to leave it right here." The response came in rapid Apache, and this time Sam caught a few more words, something about family, about running, about soldiers. The pieces of a terrible puzzle began forming in his mind. "Soldiers?" Sam asked in English, then repeated the word in his broken Apache. The child's voice became even more agitated, and Sam heard what sounded like sobbing mixed with angry words. Whatever had happened, it involved the military, and it had been bad enough to send this young one fleeing alone into the desert. Sam set the food and water on the ground, then did something that surprised himself. He sat down in the dirt, cross-legged, making himself smaller and less threatening. "My name is Samuel," he said, pointing to himself. "Sam, what's your name?" For the first time the child spoke a single word in clear English. "Aiyana." "Aiyana," Sam repeated, trying to get the pronunciation right. "That's a beautiful name. Aiyana, where is your family?" The crying that followed broke Sam's heart. It was the sound of a child who had lost everything, who was utterly alone in a world that had suddenly become hostile and dangerous. Slowly, carefully, Aiyana emerged from under the wagon. Sam got his first clear look at the child. Definitely a girl, maybe 7 years old, with traditional Apache clothing that had once been beautiful, but was now torn and stained. The flint knife remained clutched in her small fist, but it was no longer raised defensively. She was painfully thin, her cheeks hollow with hunger, and there were cuts and scrapes on her arms and legs that spoke of a hard journey through rough country. But it was her eyes that told the real story. Ancient pain in a child's face, the look of someone who had seen things no young person should ever witness. "Aiyana," Sam said gently. "Are you hurt? Do you need medicine?" She pointed to a cut on her leg that was red and swollen, infected. Sam winced, recognizing the signs of blood poisoning that could kill if left untreated. "Joe," Sam called, "I need your wife's medical kit, now." Joe's wife, Aiyana Martinez, emerged from the trading post carrying a leather satchel filled with basic medical supplies. She was a kind woman, mother of 4, and her maternal instincts kicked in the moment she saw Aiyana. "Dios mío," Aiyana whispered, falling to her knees beside the child. "Pobrecita, how long has she been alone?" Aiyana began speaking to Aiyana in Spanish, which the girl seemed to understand better than English. Many Apache learned Spanish from trading relationships that went back generations. As Aiyana examined the infected wound, Aiyana finally released her grip on the flint knife, setting it carefully beside her, but keeping it within reach. The gesture spoke volumes. She was beginning to trust, but she wasn't ready to be defenseless. "She needs proper medical care," Aiyana said to Sam. "This infection could spread, and she's severely dehydrated and malnourished. Can you treat her here? I can clean the wound and give her some willow bark tea for the fever, but she needs rest, good food, and constant care for several days." Sam made his decision. "Then she's coming home with me." "Sam," Joe warned, "think about what you're saying. Martha's been fragile since Sarah died. Bringing home an Apache child might what? Give her something to live for again?" Sam's voice carried conviction he hadn't felt in years. "Joe, my wife has been dying inside for 3 years. Maybe taking care of someone who needs her will remind her what it feels like to be needed." Aiyana had been listening to the conversation, her dark eyes moving from face to face, clearly understanding more than they realized. Suddenly, she spoke in careful, broken English. I work. I help. No trouble." The words hit Sam like a physical blow. This child, alone and injured, was already trying to prove her worth, to earn her keep. It reminded him painfully of his own daughter, who had always been eager to help around the ranch. "Aiyana," Sam said, his voice thick with emotion, "you don't have to work for help. Children should be cared for just because they're children." Aiyana finished cleaning the wound and bandaging it with clean cloth. "There, but she needs to keep it clean and dry." As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and red, Sam knew he had to make a choice. He could turn Aiyana over to the authorities, knowing she'd likely end up on a reservation far from her homeland. Or he could take her home and face whatever consequences came with that decision. Looking into those brave, frightened eyes, Sam realized there was really no choice at all. The journey home and Martha's heart. The wagon ride back to the ranch was tense and quiet. Aiyana sat in the back, wrapped in a blanket Aiyana had given her, clutching her flint knife while watching the desert landscape roll by. Sam glanced back frequently, noting how the child's eyes constantly scanned for danger, never fully relaxing despite her obvious exhaustion. "We'll be home in about an hour," Sam said, trying to sound reassuring. "My wife Martha will take good care of you." Aiyana nodded, but said nothing. The fever from her infected wound was making her drowsy, and Sam worried about how much longer she could hold on. As they approached the ranch, Sam's anxiety grew. How would Martha react? His wife had barely spoken to anyone since Sarah's death, spending her days tending a small garden and staring out at the mountains. The arrival of another child, especially an Apache child, could either heal her or break her completely. The ranch house came into view as the sun touched the horizon. Built of adobe and wood, it was modest but comfortable, surrounded by corrals and outbuildings. Smoke rose from the chimney, meaning Martha was preparing dinner. Sam pulled the wagon up to the front porch and climbed down. "Stay here for a moment, Aiyana. I need to talk to my wife first." He found Martha in the kitchen, stirring a pot of stew. She was still beautiful at 35, but grief had etched lines around her green eyes and stolen the color from her auburn hair. She looked up when Sam entered, and he saw the familiar emptiness in her gaze. "You're back late," she said simply, returning to her stirring. "Martha, I need to tell you something important. I've brought someone home with me." Her stirring stopped. "Who?" "A child. A little girl, about 7 years old. She's Apache, and she's hurt and alone." Martha set down the wooden spoon and turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "An Apache child. Her name is Aiyana. She was hiding under my wagon, scared and starving. She has an infected wound and needs care." "Where are her parents?" "Dead, I think, or scattered." She mentioned soldiers. Martha walked to the window and looked out at the wagon. Sam followed her gaze and saw Aiyana sitting exactly where he'd left her, still clutching the blanket and knife. "She's so small," Martha whispered, and Sam heard something in her voice he hadn't heard in 3 years. Emotion. "She reminds me of Sarah in some ways. Not in looks, but in, I don't know, the way she holds herself, brave but scared." Martha was quiet for a long moment. Then she surprised him. "Bring her in. She looks ready to collapse." Relief flooded through Sam. "Are you sure?" "A child is a child, Sam. Apache or not, she needs help." Sam returned to the wagon and gently helped Aiyana down. Her legs were shaky, and the fever was clearly affecting her balance. "Come on, little one. Let's get you inside where it's warm." Martha met them at the door, and Sam watched his wife's face carefully as she saw Aiyana up close. For a moment, Martha's expression was unguarded, and Sam saw pain, recognition, and something else. Maternal instinct awakening after years of dormancy. "Hello, Aiyana," Martha said softly. "I'm Martha. Are you hungry?" Aiyana nodded, swaying slightly on her feet. "Sam, help her to the table. I'll get food and warm water for cleaning that wound." "Nah." As Martha bustled around the kitchen with more energy than Sam had seen in years, he helped Aiyana sit down. The child's eyes followed Martha's movements, wary but hopeful. Martha placed a bowl of stew in front of Aiyana, along with fresh bread and milk. "Eat slowly," she advised. "You'll make yourself sick if you eat too fast." While Aiyana ate, Martha prepared medical supplies. "Sam, I'll need you to hold the lamp while I clean this wound properly." Working together, they carefully cleaned and rebandaged Aiyana's leg. The child bore the pain stoically, gripping Sam's hand when it hurt most, but never crying out. "Brave girl," Martha murmured, and Sam heard genuine admiration in her voice. When they finished, Aiyana was struggling to keep her eyes open. The fever, exhaustion, and full stomach were taking their toll. "She needs to sleep," Martha said. "Sam, can you prepare the small bedroom?" Sam hurried to make up the bed in what had been Sarah's room. Martha had kept it exactly as their daughter had left it, but now she stood in the doorway, looking at the small bed and toys with a different expression. "We can put her somewhere else if—" Sam began. "No," Martha said firmly. "This room needs to be used again. Sarah would want that." They helped Aiyana into the bed, and Martha tucked the blankets around her small form. The child's eyes were heavy with fever and exhaustion, but she managed to whisper something in Apache. "What did she say?" Martha asked. "I think she said thank you," Sam replied, though he wasn't entirely sure. As they left the room, Martha turned to Sam. "She can't stay forever, you know. People will talk. The territorial government won't approve." "I know, but for now, she needs us. And Martha—" He paused, seeing something in his wife's face he'd almost forgotten existed. "I think maybe we need her too." Martha didn't respond, but Sam caught her looking back toward Aiyana's room with an expression that gave him hope for the first time in 3 years. A new family and unexpected visitors. 3 weeks passed, like a gentle awakening from a long, dark dream. Aiyana's wound healed under Martha's careful attention, and color returned to the child's hollow cheeks as regular meals and safety worked their magic. More importantly, something had awakened in Martha, a purpose and joy that Sam had feared was lost forever. "She's teaching me Apache words," Martha told Sam one morning as they watched Aiyana feeding the chickens. "And I'm teaching her to read English. She's incredibly quick to learn." Sam smiled, noting how his wife's eyes sparkled for the first time in years. "She's been good for you." "She's been good for both of us," Martha corrected. "Yesterday, she helped me preserve the last of the garden vegetables. She has gentle hands, like Sarah did." The comparison no longer brought pain, but rather a bittersweet acceptance. Sarah would always be their daughter, but Aiyana was filling a different space in their hearts, not replacing, but completing. Aiyana had adapted to ranch life with remarkable resilience. She helped with chores, learned English phrases eagerly, and even began to smile occasionally. The flint knife, once clutched defensively, now rested safely in her room, a reminder of her past but no longer a necessity for survival. "Sam," Martha said one evening as they sat on the porch watching Aiyana play with their old ranch dog, "I've been thinking, what if we tried to adopt her officially, make her legally our daughter?" The question hung in the desert air like a prayer. Sam had been hoping Martha would come to this conclusion on her own. "Are you certain? It won't be easy. The territorial authorities, the neighbors—" "I don't care about the neighbors," Martha said with fierce determination. "That child has brought life back into this house. She's brought life back into me. I want her to be ours, truly ours." Before Sam could respond, the sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. 6 men rode up to the ranch, led by a territorial marshal whose badge glinted in the lamplight. Sam recognized him, Marshal William Hayes, a hard man with little patience for anything that didn't fit his narrow view of order. "Morrison!" Hayes called out, not bothering to dismount. "We hear you've been harboring an Apache child." Sam stood slowly, his hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm. "This is private property, Marshal. You're welcome to water your horses and move on. This isn't a social call. We have reports of an Apache girl living here. That's a violation of territorial law. All Apache children are supposed to be in designated reservations or schools." Martha appeared beside Sam, her arm protectively around Aiyana, who had run to them at the sight of the strangers. "Her name is Aiyana, and she's our daughter now," Martha said, her voice steady despite the obvious fear in her eyes. Hayes finally dismounted, his spurs jingling as he approached the porch. "Mrs. Morrison, I understand you've grown attached, but this child belongs with her own people." "Her people are dead," Sam said bluntly. "Killed by soldiers, from what we can piece together. She was starving and wounded when I found her." "That's unfortunate, but the law is clear. The child goes to the Indian school in Carlisle. She'll receive proper education and learn civilized ways." Aiyana pressed closer to Martha, understanding enough of the conversation to know she was in danger. She whispered something in Apache to Martha, who had learned enough of the language to understand the plea. "She's asking me not to let them take her. Martha translated, tears forming in her eyes. "Ma'am, this is difficult, but it's for the child's own good. She'll be with others of her kind. Receive proper schooling." "She's receiving proper schooling here," Martha interrupted. "She can read simple words now, she knows arithmetic, and she's learning useful skills. What more do you want?" Hayes sighed, clearly uncomfortable but determined. "Mrs. Morrison, I have my orders. The child comes with us." "Over my dead body," Sam said quietly, but the steel in his voice was unmistakable. The tension stretched tight as a wire until one of Hayes's men, a younger deputy named Collins, spoke up. "Marshal, what if there was another way? What if the Morrisons could petition for legal guardianship? Make it all official and proper?" Hayes frowned at his subordinate. "Collins, that's not how—" "But it's not illegal either," Collins pressed. "If they file the proper paperwork, pay the fees, get character references from neighbors, couldn't the territorial court consider it?" Sam felt a spark of hope. What would that involve? Hayes looked annoyed, but seemed to realize his deputy had offered a face-saving compromise. It would require extensive documentation, fees, testimony from respected citizens, and approval from a territorial judge. The process could take months, and there's no guarantee of success. "We'll do it," Martha said immediately, "whatever it takes." "And in the meantime?" Sam asked. Hayes considered this, clearly torn between duty and pragmatism. "The child stays here, but you're responsible for her. If she causes any trouble, or if your petition is denied, she goes to Carlisle immediately." After the marshal and his men rode away, Sam, Martha, and Aiyana sat on the porch in stunned silence. Finally, Aiyana spoke in her careful English. "I stay, I be your daughter?" Martha knelt down and took the child's hands in hers. "If you want to be. Would you like that?" Aiyana's response was to throw her arms around Martha's neck and whisper a single word in Apache that needed no translation. "Mother." As Sam watched his wife hold this brave little girl who had wandered into their lives, he realized that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. Aiyana had given them back their purpose, their joy, and most importantly, their capacity to love again. The legal battle ahead would be difficult, but they would face it together, as a family.